Hello, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, welcome. I talk about webtoons, manga, fanfiction, obviously, and sometimes old nostalgic shows that I remember exist or that I see that I'm like, oh my god, it wasn't a fever dream. It actually exists. So, all right, you already saw the title, you know what's up. More Merlin fanfiction recommendations because we can't get enough of our favorite two people who definitely lived out a happy life as in canon. I will accept no other answer. It's false that they died. Okay, moving on. The first one being Most Beloved. Most Beloved is supposed to be like drawing parallels between like Arthur and Merlin to Achilles and Patroclus. Oh my god, I know I'm saying that wrong. It's Greek. I don't know. But it's supposed to be drawing parallels to them. Basically, Merlin reads it and he's like fascinated by it. You know, he likes their stories, right? And Arthur, he's a little type of way because he's like, well, what's so great about Achilles? Like, oh, he's long blonde hair, he's a shiny warrior. He's like, well, I'm no god. It's like, but I feel like I'm great. He's like, you know, because he's a little envious of this. So he decides to, you know, read the story of how it goes. And, you know, he kind of says like to Merlin too, that he's like, oh, we're a lot like them. And he's like, well, not really. Like they were lovers. He's like, yeah, of course, totally. That's what I meant. Like, because he couldn't commit to it and say like, I know, but because it was his way of hinting as like he must be more. But he starts to, you know, read. Well, he gets a story told to him, but like he gets to know the story about Achilles and how Patroclus, you know, died, and how, you know, Arthur is kind of like horrified at that idea of it, and so he he thought about it, and the idea kind of festered. He's like, I would never want Merlin to ever die, and eventually a war breaks out, and they do have to, you know, defend themselves. They have to fight, and Merlin immediately, you know, he kind of takes charge. He's like, I'll lead them away, you know, he's got to do some little magic stuff. He's like, I'll lead them away, like, I'll pose as you, like, kind of how what was done for Achilles. And Arthur is immediately kind of recognizes, he's like, I refuse. Like, I'm not sending you into battle. Like, I'm not doing this. And then, like, you know, this is where they eventually do end up contesting for one another. It's very I liked it. I didn't know where it was going at first, to be honest, but I did like the parallels between the two. It was very sweet. Emrys the Great and Awkward. This one's like, it's one of the ones where what if Merlin told Morgana in the game? Like he had magic, so this is where, you know, it takes place. Like if he made the decision and told her. So they begin training together, obviously in secret. Arthur kind of catches on, not really. He misunderstands, obviously. So he thinks like to Sakabase, like, oh, that they're secretly like, you know. But he does eventually. I shouldn't say he does. He finds out. Because the way it is Merlin encourages Morgana to tell Arthur that she has magic, and you know, Morgana even questions like, "Oh, why don't you tell Arthur?" And it's because, you know, it's Merlin. You know, has some little light angst in there. He's too scared to do it. So Morgana does end up telling Arthur. She's scared, but she does end up telling him. And Arthur in turn freaks out because he puts together that, you know, the whole fire thing, like in the window shattering, like all of that was her. And so he freaks out and he's like, we have to get you out of Camelot because you're going to get discovered one, you know, one way or the other. And it's, you know, it terrified him because he doesn't want to see Morgana get hurt. And he's like, you have no control over it, clearly. And Morgana's like, oh, I'm staying. Like, it's fine. I have a teacher. It's like, who's teaching? He's like, well, I can't tell you that part because, you know, Merlin doesn't want to be outed. She's like, but they're teaching me magic. So from there, Arthur goes to Gaius because he practiced magic at one point. He goes to Gaius, and Merlin's obviously there, and he questions it. And this is where Arthur kind of puts together like, oh well, of course, because Merlin was the one to actually listen to Morgana and her concerns, to sit down and believe her. So he's like, oh, of course, that would set off. Of course they'd be into each other then. So you see, he misunderstands, but he's not there yet. So through that, we kind of go on this whole like little misadventures where Arthur slowly learns of the legend between him and Emrys, and so he's like, "What are we?" He's like, "It sounds," because Morgana puts it in the idea in his head in the first place, like the devotion, like it's supposed to Emrys has for his king. It's like it almost sounds like this Emrys is like he's in love. He's in love, and Merlin is like, because Morgana is obviously teasing him, because at some point he did tell her, it's like, I'm also Emrys. Surprise. So he, which Morgana then tells, Arthur, like, oh, my teacher is Emrys. So helpful. But, so Arthur, because he feels like, he thinks, again, that Merlin and Morgana are kind of together. He thinks, well, I might as well kind of throw myself at Emrys, which they do meet up because Arthur wants to meet Emrys because he's like, well, if I'm supposedly like, if we're supposed to bring about a new era and work together, I want to meet them. So they do end up meeting sort of in the forest, obviously, and Merlin is like transformed and has like a cloak on, so you can't really see anything. Everything looks obscured. So, but because of Arthur thinking Morgana and Merlin are kind of, they like each other, he kind of ends up leaning into the idea of just like, well, if I'm supposed to like be so devoted to me that he's kind of like almost in love with me, well, I just gotta throw myself into that. But an incident occurs where it's Merlin using magic to clean up Arthur's chambers as usual, and Arthur walks in on it. So he sees this, and Merlin oddly freaks out. He's like, I know I didn't tell you. It's like, and he's scared. And Arthur immediately starts packing things. He's like, just random things for Merlin. He's like, well, obviously you have no control of magic. You need to get you out, like, to, you try to get to Camelot so you won't be hurt. So he's like, well, he's like, giving this whole heartfelt speech, like, I'll miss you. Like, I'm not your work, though. It's like, everyone's like, oh, no, it's fine. Like, I have a teacher. It's like, it's like, Emrys. And, Merlin doesn't correct those. He's like, yes, Emrys. That's also a teacher. Because Arthur, his assumption is, oh, so that's why you two are so constantly together. Not because, like, oh, the shared secret, where, the first person to actually listen to her. It's because you both have magic and you're both learning from the same person. And, Merlin doesn't correct this. He's just like, yes, definitely. He's also teaching me. This is what's happening. This is correct. And so Arthur's like immediately relieved, and he's like, oh my god, I have a shot. So the next time they meet up as Emrys, Arthur immediately kind of apologizes, like, I can't know anything for myself really sure, because like even if because he's talking about Merlin, he's like, even if Merlin won't hurt my feelings, like I at least like he said I can't get into a relationship like under false, and Merlin's like, this is where he reveals himself, and Merlin's like, you love me? It's like, what? No. And then he reveals like, surprise, I'm actually Emrys. That's how the whole thing goes down, where it's just real like, it's actually Merlin, and he's also not that well, okay. I shouldn't say he's not that stupid. He makes really questionable decisions, but you know what I mean. It's not. It's actually Merlin who's teaching Morgana and like doing all this and being weird, which is in turn explains why he's so jumpy around the whole magic thing. It's because you're mentioning it. And he's like, oh my god, I'm going to be discovered. Uh oh, this isn't great. A few of my favorite things is where it starts off with Arthur, Morgana, and Gwen. That's right. They're kind of going back and forth. They're kind of arguing because Arthur doesn't seem to find a point. Like, he's trying to find, uh, he's trying to find, because he's supposed to, right? Or, well, yeah, he's supposed to. But also, he wants to marry for love. So he's supposed to find someone, but he also wants to marry for love. So he wants to find the right person. And he kind of sees no point because, well, everyone, he doesn't, you know, he doesn't love any of these girls. Like, he doesn't love any of them. So what's the point of it? And that's where Morgana makes a list of basically all of, there are a bunch of questions that they're supposed to answer. They're supposed to answer. And some of the questions, Arthur's like, none of them are ever going to get this. So this is pointless. This is stupid. And Merlin starts to come in. So Arthur quickly hides behind one of the screens, and just randomly, Merlin doesn't question it, but randomly, Morgana starts, questioning him from some things on the list. Merlin doesn't really question it, but he does answer it, and he answers it so accurately, it's right. What's his favorite color? It's like, oh, Arthur will say it's red, the red that they Pendragon red, I guess. But it's actually this color because it reminds him of his mom. And it's like, oh, well, where's his favorite place he likes to go to be alone? And it's like, what's his favorite, he does all and he says oh, and his favorite scent, when he's having a particularly rough day, he's like, I'll have lavender incense and open the windows a little bit so it'll be more subtle so they won't notice. And he just kind of lists off all the things that Arthur, some of them he doesn't even know and hasn't even realized, this is his favorite flower. He'll tell you this, but it's actually this, because he clearly is fond of it, because it reminds him of this. And just all the little things that he does for Arthur to make him comfortable, and it makes Arthur feel oh, he's like, oh my god, I'm so because he's listening behind the screen. So he's like, oh my god. He's like, I didn't think anyone knew about that, or you remember that, but clearly, and again, Merlin never questions it. So he's like, anyway, I have to go, before Arthur gets back, I have to go do what the routine usually does, which is preparing his room so he can be nice and calm when he comes in. And he just Morgana and Gwen are stunned. They're like, oh my god, he answers this also accurately. And Arthur comes out, he's like, well, you should rip up that list. I don't need any more. Because he's like, I have found this is basically gets to realize oh my god, I like Merlin. Which leads into the sequel to it, which is The Trouble with Courting. Oh, it's exactly how it is. Oh my god. It's basically Arthur trying and failing repeatedly to come up with different ways to court him, right? At first he tries with chicken, because it's supposed to be a play on when Arthur was enchanted, and he was going with chicken and what was it, beans or something, because he's like, chicken and beans, it's supposed to be something meaningful, but it's what does that even mean? So that's a joke and a jab that they trade between each other. So Arthur grabs the servant. He's like, I want you to I want you to get chicken. Hey, just put it in the room. Except it doesn't go as planned, because he gets there and it's but the chicken's alive and terrorizing everything. It's why is it alive? It's you want it. The servant's this is what you said you wanted chicken. It's I cooked. What? He's I wanted it cooked. He's apparently I had to tell the servant to actually cook the chicken, so it didn't work out. He tries with flowers, doesn't work out because he forgets there's a language with flowers, so you might say So he ends up offending Merlin instead. And it all kind of, ends with him accidentally hurting Lancelot because he's trying to show off, because they were like training. So he's trying to show off to Merlin, but he ends up accidentally hurting Lance. And so that's when he eventually comes clean. He's like, I wasn't trying to, I was just trying to go, you would have failed. And he's like so frustrated by it. And Merlin's like, touch. He's like, you were trying to do it. It's like, well, you didn't have to do any of that. You could have just, like, it was so, because, like, at that point, Arthur, or not Arthur, Merlin thinks, because by that point he's kind of he's told him that he has magic, and so he thinks he's kind of taking it out on Lance, and he feels bad, but Arthur's like, no, I couldn't do it right. So he's super upset about himself. But Merlin comforts him, and he's like, no, of course you didn't have to do any of this, like, you could have just told me, and, like, you didn't have to do any big gesture. It's like, we all would have been fine. So he did all this for nothing. Sweet, but he did it for nothing. So that's how it all kind of ends. A little happy, wrapped up, happy ending. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Until next time, bye!